Welcome back to Reignited, you guys. There's no point in beating around the bush. You've seen the thumbnail. You know that we are twin charging our Hemi-powered Magnum. So if you've never heard that phrase before, twin charging just means that I'm going to be both supercharging and turbocharging the engine at the same time. Now the reason for this is because I was racking my brain. I knew I wanted the next build on the channel to be a forced induction build, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to go with a supercharger or with a turbocharger. Then I wondered, why am I trying to decide at all? Just do them both at the same time. It's something I've never done before. I'm very excited about it. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to ridiculously overcomplicate things. Don't really care. It's going to be interesting. It's what I love. I hope you guys are into it too. Now, this is by no means my first forced induction build that I've done. Way back in 2002, I built a 1996 Dodge Neon, and I actually built that thing up. That went through several iterations. First, I had a bolt-ons that I'd done, then I put it back to stock. Then I built a turbocharger system for it, running about 10 PSI, raced it quite a bit. That was fun. Then I put it back to stock, thinking I was going to sell it. Then instead, I decided to build a supercharger system for it. That was very unique. I took a M90 Eaton supercharger from a 3.8 liter Buick, hand fabricated a full system for that thing. That was pretty cool too. Now I've also done a turbo build on a motorcycle. I took a 1980 Yamaha XS650. I completely fabricated that entire motorcycle, the whole engine, subframe, swing arm, suspension, everything is from scratch. I changed the engine to fuel injection and I turbocharged it, running it off of a Mega Squirt engine management system. That was a huge learning experience and also very fun. Now the supercharger we have here is an Eaton M112 unit. This is what you would find on, say, like a 0304 Mustang Cobra or a Ford Lightning. I think this one's from a Ford Lightning.
Wrong again.
But I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't really matter. I think it's going to work out great for our application. Now, this is not the actual turbo that we're going to be using. I don't have the turbo that we need just yet. To be honest, I'm not really a turbocharger expert, so I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the right one for our application, trying to do some research on that. I do have a T4 flange, so I do need it to be a T4 turbo of some kind. If you guys have some ideas on turbocharger sizing, go ahead and hit me up. Let me know. I'd like to hear. Now, the whole reason I'm taking on this project is because I just wanted to do something a little bit more extreme and something to push myself. I feel like I've been very stagnant the last few years. Haven't really had a chance to really push my skills and learn new things along the way. That's kind of the goal behind this thing. Now, as you can imagine, stuffing a supercharger and a turbocharger in the engine bay is going to be a feat in and of itself. That engine bay is smaller than it looks, and I think I'm going to regret this decision before I'm done. But I honestly think it's going to make for great entertainment. I think you guys are going to really enjoy watching this project. So the idea here is I will be building an intake manifold from scratch that the supercharger will rest on right up here. And then I also want to have the turbocharger in the engine bay. Now, it would be very much simpler to put a turbo or even a twin turbo setup down behind where the catalytic converters currently go right now. That's the way a lot of the aftermarket setups do, because there's room down there to actually put the turbos. I don't want to do that. I want to be able to see both the supercharger and the turbocharger when you open the hood. I think that'll be part of the intrigue of the whole project. The problem is, where exactly do you put it? There's just no room in here. So my idea currently, and this is all subject to change, is that the turbo is going to go right here where the factory airbox originally sits. Now the problem here is that the downpipe is going to have to run right along here on top of the valve cover and then cut down and go over the top of the steering shaft and all of that. So it's going to be very, very tight. Now, as far as the actual turbo manifolds themselves go, I'm building them out of full stainless steel, and they will be log style manifolds. And basically you'll have one on the passenger side that links to a pipe that goes underneath the transmission and then comes up and parallels the turbo manifold on the driver's side here, and both of those will come up into that T4 flange for that turbocharger. And then, like I mentioned, the downpipe will go over the top and down. So it is going to be absolutely jam-packed here in the engine bay. I'm excited. I can't wait to see how this thing turns out. It's going to be a massive amount of work, but man, it's gonna be so much fun. As you can imagine, on a fabrication job this complex, we're going to need a lot of materials and parts. So I've kind of laid out some of the basics of what we've got here. I have all sorts of different aluminum bends here because we are going to actually have this intercooled as well before it goes into the supercharger. So we have some aluminum bends, we have some stainless steel bends, we have our stainless steel log manifold components here. Now this is schedule 10. I originally was looking for schedule 40, but after seeing this schedule 10, this stuff is plenty thick enough. Now I am planning on back purging all of this as I weld it. This is going to be fun because I haven't actually done any back purging before with my stainless welding. Now it has been a hot minute, say about 3 years since I welded aluminum, so it's gonna take me a little bit to get back in the groove there. I would not have been able to even start this project without the help of one of my viewers. His name is James Long. He has a company up in Boring, Oregon called Boring Research, and he's actually a machinist by trade. He sent me some photos of his charger, his Pursuit chargers that he built a custom supercharger setup for as well. He showed me his intake plates that he had made, and I said, hey, I could use a set of those for what I'm doing, and he very graciously agreed to make me a set. So that was absolutely fantastic. You can see him right here. I just had him leave them rough here. That's why they're all just squared off, because I didn't know if I was going to make any modifications as I went. But you can see he has them all milled out here for the factory gaskets to slip into. So this is going to be absolutely fantastic and integral to getting this whole project off the ground. So thank you again, James Long. I really appreciate that. Now we also have here our stainless flanges from Motion Raceworks for the exhaust to make our turbo manifolds out of. I used these once before on my turbo or on my C10 build, my 392 build. They worked out great, so I got them again. Now you notice here that I do have also, I splurged a little bit and went with some of these vibrant clamps to go up top. I think they'll really kind of complete the look. And then you'll notice here I have some various components here of pulley systems. We're going to go into that a little bit later in the build. I'll show you what exactly I'm trying to do with those. So there it is, guys. Nice little overview here. And before we jump into our actual engine that we're going to use, I just want to thank you guys for following along. If you like what we're trying to do here, go ahead and drop me a comment down below. Please share this with other people as well. Conversely, if you're not actually interested, let me know that too. But before we can get into the fabrication side of things, we've got to get the engine all prepped and ready for that boost that's coming its way. Now, I told you guys before that stock engine that's in that car, I just did a quick refresh on it, slapped that thing back together, because I knew that engine was going to be coming out very soon. This is the reason why. Now, this engine is actually a 2006, I believe it's actually from a Ram 1500, but I wanted to use this engine because it's already been gone through by a machine shop. They've done a nice hone job on it, they checked all the surfaces, we know that that's all ready to go. So this is going to be our basis. Now, I kind of want to see what this thing can do on a stock bottom end before I go building it up. So I'm not going to put any kind of forged internals in here, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to modify anything with this block. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take this thing apart in this episode. We're going to put some new main bearings in there. We're going to put some new rod bearings in there. And importantly, we are going to put new piston rings. So of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up those piston ring gaps so that they don't butt together under boost and break those piston ring lands. The pistons in here are going to be our obvious weak link. That's where you're going to see the most issues. So we're going to open up that ring gap, see if we can prevent that from happening. But I'm pretty excited about it. Also, we are going to replace these lifters with all non-MDS lifters because we're getting rid of that MDS system altogether. I'm also going to be using that Melling oil pump that you saw, that high volume oil pump that you saw in a previous episode. If you haven't seen that before, I'll go ahead and link that down below. But I was really impressed with that Melling pump as far as what it was capable of doing. It actually put an output that was very close to what the Hellcat pump could provide. So I think it's going to be a great foundation for this build. Now, a big thing that you guys are going to be excited about here too is that we are also going to be swapping a set of Eagle cylinder heads onto this engine. Now, if you don't know, Eagle cylinder heads are 2009 and later Hemi cylinder heads. They have much better flow characteristics and a little bit higher compression ratio, but we'll get into all that a little bit later. As it sits right now, let's go ahead and start tearing this engine down. There we go. As you can see, we got our engine fully torn down, basically just a bare block here. We got all of our parts laid out here. I went ahead and ran a few of these through the parts washer just to make sure that they're more decently clean than they were. We don't need them perfect, just enough for reassembly. So we got everything kind of laid out here. We have our new main bearings here. We have our new rod bearings. We got some new piston rings right here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and get the crankshaft reinstalled first and get our mains put back in. Now, one thing I do wanna show you guys is that on these Hemi engines, they really don't have much of a reputation for bottom end issues. And that's one thing I really like about them, is that the bottom end is actually really strong on these things and works really well. I was gonna go ahead and give you guys a close-up right now of the stock main bearings. Now, this is on an engine that has 180,000 miles, and these main bearings, honestly, they have a couple of marks on them, but to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't really even have a problem putting these original bearings back in and reusing them. Now, we do have new ones, but I'm just telling you that these things don't really have bottom end issues. Of course, it does happen. You're going to have these outliers here and there, but they're really good overall. And one last thing to realize here is that this is essentially going to be a bit of a sacrificial lamb engine. I don't know if what I'm doing here is even going to work. I mean, I'm turbocharging and supercharging this engine. And if I blow the thing up due to my own stupidity of as far as tuning goes, I don't really want to have put thousands of dollars into a forced bottom end and then make a stupid mistake with the tuning that really costs me. So like I said, somewhat of a sacrificial lamb with this engine. We're going to do our best to put it together the right way, make sure it's solid and holds up as best it can. But in the end, this is all still an experiment to see what happens. Now, here's a rather important thing about your main bearings that you want to take notice of is that one side is extremely smooth and the other side has this drilled port for the oil passageway. Now, it's very important to realize that that oil passageway comes out of the block itself right here. So you want to put this particular one in the block side and this one goes on the cap side. Now, when you're actually installing these main bearings, there is a little tang here on the back of the bearing that the block is cut for. So again, those bearings will only go in one way. I always find it easiest to go ahead and slip the tang end in and then you just push down on the other end until it's nice and even on both sides. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So obviously very simple to get those upper crankshaft bearings in place. Now the next thing we have to do is install our little thrust washers right here. Now essentially what these do is they help keep the crankshaft from walking back and forth because it's going to have a little bit of front and back movement. It needs to have some bearings to actually push up against as it does so that's not like wearing into the block or anything like that. Now the nice thing about these thrust washers or thrust bearings is that you can see that they are actually cut differently. So this one has a different tab than this one here. And what that means is that the block is set up that same way, so you can't actually mix these two up. So that's really great. What we're gonna do is we're gonna throw some engine assembly lube on here to help stick it in place while we get our crankshaft set down in. All right, just that easy. Now, obviously, before we put our crankshaft back into place, we want to apply a liberal coating of that engine assembly lube to all of these upper bearings. Now, as you guys know, when I am starting any engine that I've just put in, I'll go ahead and crank it over for a good minute or so without the fuel pump fuse in there so that I can get oil pressure to the engine before I actually fire it. But this stuff is a good extra insurance policy because it's so tacky that it won't drain away very quickly. So you definitely will have some form of lubrication when you're first cranking that engine over. Just like that. All right, we look to be in good shape here. Now we're gonna go ahead and get our main caps back on. Now the great thing about the main caps on the Hemi engine is that they are both stamped with which one it is, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and also what direction they go in. So there's no possibility of actually messing up your main caps when you're reinstalling them. All right, we're going to start installing our main caps. So of course, make sure that you install the other side of the crankshaft main bearing. Go ahead and get that lubed up with some engine assembly lube there. And again, as I mentioned, on the top of the cap itself, you guys probably can't see this on camera, but there's a stamp number 1 right here on this side, and there's an arrow here on this side showing you which direction it goes towards the front of the engine. So crankshaft main bearing number 1 all the way at the front here. Now these things can be a little tight to get down in here. What you can do is go ahead and just line up the bolt holes, and then you can kind of tap it in with a plastic mallet. Give it a little pop, 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 pop right there. Sometimes I find it helps to actually install the bolts here just to make sure it stays lined up before you give it a few taps. There we go. Now another thing I like to do before I torque these top caps here is I like to go ahead and get the side bolts that go crossways into the main bearing cap. I at least like to thread them into place before I really crank these things down, because if you tighten these things and these aren't in there, you can find difficulty getting them in after the fact. In order to torque down our main bearing caps right here, the procedure is to tighten these to 20 foot-pounds and then do an additional 90 degrees on top of that. Also, quick note, before we move forward at all, we have just one cap torqued into place. Now we haven't done our cross bolts yet, but we have one cap torqued into place. An important step as you're doing this reassembly, after every single cap is installed, go ahead and spin the crank. Make sure that it still spins smoothly like it should. There should be no binding on it whatsoever at all. Keep in mind that as these caps are torqued as tight as they need to be, you still have a couple of thousandths clearance between the bearing surface and the crankshaft itself. So there should be no binding whatsoever. It should be very simple to turn, just like this. Okay, we have all of our crankshaft main bearings torqued down into place. We have also torqued these cross bolts, which are torqued to 20 foot-pounds. So everything is in here. So you have your structural rigidity this way, but also this way as well with these cross bolts. So great design on here. Let's make sure our crankshaft still spins freely with no resistance. Absolutely it does. That feels absolutely perfect. So our crankshaft is in. We're good to go. We're going to flip this thing over and start working on our piston rings. Now in the next episode of the Twin Charge Magnum, we're going to finish our engine reassembly here, and that includes doing the Eagle cylinder head swap. Now I get a lot of people ask me about that, what's involved with that swap, so you won't want to miss the next episode. Until then, we'll see you next time on Reignited.